Welcome back to our series analyzing the 1990s TV series Sliders. This episode might be short, might not. The only difference was that is objectively seen is that Cue-Ball's dad, Michael Mallory, is alive, not having died on his way to work in 1984. But that would make this episode too short and boring, so I want to briefly discuss how the world's mentioned in the travelogue on the Earth Prime website. It says that the point of divergence is about 1892 when Standard Oil Trust was dissolved by the Ohio Supreme Court, reformed, and then undone again by the Supreme Court of the U.S. in 1911 via the Sherman Antitrust Act, making oil and gas industry nationalized. As such, petrol products have become incredibly cheap, except gasoline, which was rationed to just public transport, especially with the robust trolley system, as well as the military. As such, Michael Mallory could not be hit by a random driver on his way to work. I think in such a world that there'd be a more robust socialist, or at least democratic socialist movement manages to get only a few improvements in the economic order, such as this nationalization. In this world, I would think, as another possible alternate, Gene Debs would have still lost his bid to be the president, but might have gotten significantly more votes, maybe pulling them ahead to be even above what the Republicans and getting actual electoral college votes. Could be complaints about how the U.S. trolley was connected during the timeline, but even at the time there was an extensive trolley system that could allow for relatively easy transport through the east half of the U.S. in our timeline. There are disagreements that I have for it, though, like if it was just that petrol was just used for public transportation and military. Electric cars would have won out in the early days, and Edison would be even more revered than he is in our timeline, except mostly as an electric car inventor. Now we have Hennessy's to talk briefly about their thoughts. Annie?
Okay, so the implications of the public transit world are kind of strange to me, mostly because suburbia wouldn't really exist if there was a 1911 divergence point that led to public transportation taking off the way it did. The public transportation system in the United States prior to the Second Cold War was actually the best in the world, and the public transportation system was heavily dismantled by the fact that the car became a symbol of personal freedom for many people. And one might potentially see that the Cold War might be weaponized in a different way, where maybe suburbia becomes a symbol of that and somehow that ends up forming regardless. But, there is a possibility that even though we don't really see trolleys or anything like that, and we do see a few cars that could be taxis, there could have been some trolleys like just a few blocks away or whatever. And this would be way less environmentally friendly than no suburbs, but at the same time, having this mass public transportation system as a way of travel would definitely be much better for the environment than what we have now. However, I think that Earth Prime's travelogue is full of shit because, quite frankly, this is a weird divergence point to explain off why someone didn't get hit by a car when something so simple as someone having a difference in their day and not driving drunk, for instance, could change this in a much more meaningful way that doesn't lead to me having to explain off why suburbia still exists, despite the fact that suburbia evolved the way it did because of the popularity of the car.
Yeah, the most simple change could be like Michael Mallory was 1 minute slower or faster on his day.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say, where's the slightly better work hours world where he still works until late at night, but maybe that particular night he wasn't working? I also think it's worth noting that when they call the cab, you can see the lights of, 4 other cars. They could theoretically be taxis, you don't get a good look at them, but it seems like they're extrapolating a lot. I mean, what do we know about this world? We know that there are homeless people, as there should be. We know that cabs exist, and we know that Michael Mallory is alive. I think that this is all very silly, but one thing that I think kind of redeems it is because of an episode, I think in the 5th season, where Mallory creates this electric car world, and so my headcanon is, in response to his dad being hit by a car, he has this highly regulated public transportation world that they have to rebel against later. But that's purely just me trying to make this work better. One thing I really don't like about this, actually, and there are a couple of worlds like this, at one point in a couple of episodes down, they're going to reference, we don't know how many worlds there are. There could be 6 or 6 million. They've been to a world where it is too cold to survive, and they likely would have died if they didn't tamper with the timer. They were in a world where communists took over, it was an authoritarian state, and they nearly died in a firefight. Why not just hang around in this world, which is identical to yours, and your dad is alive? He's not even conflicted over this, the monster. And you can probably build a new timer, even if it takes a year. It's probably better than risking your life. I understand the story doesn't happen if they do that, but I feel like they could have just said something to acknowledge this.
For Rembrandt and Wade, it kind of makes sense because they're just at the whims of the timer. They can't fix it at anything. But the people who do know what they're talking about and can fix it and invented the damn thing. So, continuing then, Koki, what about Puerto Rico?
What about Puerto Rico?
So, the Puerto Rican Railroad actually had a pretty good run. It was built at the tail end of the 19th century, and it ultimately declined in the 1950s. I think it's worth noting that there was a catastrophic accident in my hometown, actually, in Aguadilla, in the 40s, that there was a derailment, it went down this hill, it was a whole thing, but more than any kind of bad press, it was really innovations in terms of building the interstate highways across Puerto Rico, and just the car is what killed public transport island-wide. Now, there's still a train network in the San Juan metropolitan area, as well as lots of buses. I'm gonna say, to go from the west side of Puerto Rico to the east side, I can think of two lines, Blue Line and La Sultana. Actually, I can only take La Sultana back, because you have to be in Mayagüez to get on there. They will drop you off in Aguadilla if, you pay in San Juan, so... The point is, public transportation is not great in Puerto Rico, so this world, I might have had a better time living there. That being said, there are other ways that private car transportation could have failed. A group that was pretty active, actually, were the Macheteros. They could have done some terrorist actions in, the Midwest where a lot of the car manufacturing was happening. They had done a lot of things in the name of Puerto Rican independence, and so we can see this decline in private transport as a product of perhaps tensions between the U.S. and Puerto Rico. The U.S. manufacturing economy overall would decline if they could deal some kind of real blow. And, well, I think that the decline of the independence movement would still go more or less the way it did. The statehood movement might take a new character, where they would be in favor of annexation, but it's now in favor of Puerto Rico's annexation of the declining U.S. So when Pedro Rosselló is elected in 92, instead of healthcare, universal healthcare, which was implemented during his governorship, he might care more about public transportation in Puerto Rico, because that would be more important, and declare himself God Emperor of North America. So at this point in the 90s, Puerto Rico would have pushed the American government past the Rockies, and San Francisco might be one of the few enclaves of United States governance, which I think is the most reasonable assumption we can make based on the information we have of this world.
Oh, guess that's it for this time. See you in the next world.
Happy Women's Day.
Gis.